Stephen, how are
Doing well. It's another Friday in the books.
you? This is true. Been a busy week. Lots going on, lots of things happening, and aiming to help people learn more and understand more and make the best choices we can make as well. Kind of our goal for today. So part of the topic was to talk about what we call levels of evidence, which is trying to decide how does a parent choose a program, and are there some degrees of confidence you could have in terms of which programs have more scientific proof of effectiveness, which ones have mild or moderate proof, and which ones really have no proof, which basically means you're just hoping it's going to be effective, but there's no real supports that tells you it is or is not going to be effective. So then you're just kind of guessing from that context.
So let's start with, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown out there about evidence, and it's evidence-based, it's research-based, it's this, it's that. You know, coming from the parent's perspective, the parents don't care necessarily who studied it, when it got studied, how it got studied, the fact that it works, and it works every time, or it works the great majority of the time, I should say. I mean, that's really what they need to hear. But what I want you to do is explain why those terminology, those terms are so important when you're going out trying to research and or find a program that is the best one for your child.
Yeah, and probably the easiest way to explain it is to talk from the educational model versus the medical model. They're different in several ways. One, which is most all of healthcare is really aiming to be evidence-based from the highest caliber of studies as possible, because then you have the best chance that you're going to get the best treatment with the best outcomes and with the safest, operational piece too. And so the gold standard, and this is what's, promoted, staunchly supported by Dr. Sally Shaywitz, the Yale Center for Dyslexia, and pretty much anybody who's a peer-reviewed published author on treatment programs, is a randomized controlled trial. That's kind of like the science that built penicillin, or the science that built most all medical treatments. It means you've compared treatment A with treatment B with treatment C with treatment D, they all had some promise. And the question is, when you compare them head to head with the same population or the same difficulties you're trying to improve, is there a difference in the outcomes? If there is a difference, the question is, okay, then we want the program that has the best outcomes and gets the best progress, because then you're going to have the best chance to have the least likelihood that your funds, your time, your energy are going to be wasted and potentially are going to cause more frustration, or going to make the student themselves feel like, see, another program didn't work. It's actually me. It's my brain. I'm just not as smart as somebody else, which is now the opposite of what we were hoping the effect would be, which is parents are choosing treatments that would help improve the child's skills. But then they went with a program that somebody said they thought it worked, or they heard it could work, or it worked for my neighbor's kid, or it makes sense, it sounds logical, and there's not a lot of confidence or evidence or proof that it's going to be a high likelihood that it's going to work and work well. So with healthcare, randomized controlled trials, we compare several different interventions to each other with one population, like say it's diabetes, trying to figure out what's the best insulin and amount of injection and when it's injected, getting all those parameters delineated, or whether is penicillin the best for strep throat and ear infections, or when they compare head to head, is there a different antibiotic that's more effective for ear infections? And so that should be the treatment of choice, not penicillin. That's really the most high-level piece of support that lets parents know with a high degree of confidence that, this is going to work and it's going to work well. and I'm not going to have to go try 3, 5, or 10 different programs. I'll be able to see it and know what's happening and see how things are progressing.
So when in really this is more based on parents that are going out and getting private dyslexia remediation versus what the school provides, because we know that what the school provides is what the school provides. That's it. A lot of times.
Yeah.
And then we have to fight. We as parents and advocates have to fight to get, the methodologies that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the school districts. Is there anything that we can do as parents to try to get the school districts to use a more scientifically proven methodology?
Well, school districts usually have one person in the administration who really is the key person for choosing curriculums, and that's the chief academic officer. And typically they're going to be following the Department of Education guidelines, which are, is there one of 4 levels of support for this program? Is there strong evidence? Is there moderate evidence? Is there promising evidence? Or is there evidence that demonstrates a rationale? So they have like 4 different levels of evidence they should be looking for. And parents should be asking for, I want a program that has strong evidence.
So but what is, you say evidence, but what is evidence? Because because I can go, well, I've got evidence here. It's on paper. It must be evident. This must be evidence. They say it's here. I got this. There's articles written about it. What does evidence look like?
Well, this is where parents can arm themselves with the definitions that the DOE reports. And those definitions include things like, strong evidence is the highest tier. And the DOE definition says it's based on at least one really well-designed, well-implemented experimental study. And that study demonstrated a statistically significant and positive effect of the treatment component and the outcome that we're looking for. The goal, though, is you're always looking for is, but what other programs were in that treatment study? Do they just compare the treatment to a no treatment control? Well, typically any treatment's going to show some progress and some gain. But if they compare 3 or 4 treatments together, okay, which treatment was the most effective compared to the other 3? Or was there equal outcomes across all 3 and one's not any better than the other? So it's trying to help parents arm themselves with a knowledge base of, 1, I'm looking for strong evidence, and 2, I'm looking for a study that shows the treatment was compared to other treatments, and I want to pick the one that had the best outcomes, the best effectiveness. There's different entities that are supposed to help make this decision, but in the world of research, so in our case, my group and I and Florida State and the Morris Center, we conducted 3 5-year randomized controlled trials. Most people don't understand that that's like a 500 to 700 page research project that you're submitting to the National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development. They're going to convene a panel of national experts who are typically other researchers within that field. They may have different philosophies, they may have different programs, but they know they're there to demonstrate and donate time to the advancement of science. And so when you're a funded researcher, commonly you're going to be asked to serve on a board to review other proposals. It's kind of how the system works. You have the high-level researchers critiquing each other's studies, and then they're ranking them. And typically in the NICHD kind of realm, it's only studies in the top 1, 3, or 5% that are actually getting selected for funding. So it's a highly competitive process to even get funding. Then you have to conduct the study if you get the funding. And then when you go to publish the findings, it's going to be reviewed again by at least 3 leading experts in the field to make sure that what you're reporting in the research study doesn't overstate what your data has in it. doesn't make claims that your data doesn't really support. Doesn't look like the data is false, because we hear reports sometimes so and so has now been found to have falsified data in their research studies. You're trying to help make sure that doesn't happen in this whole peer review process of comparing treatments and trying to find the most effective treatments. So it's a lot to put on a parent to say, you go figure this out, because most parents aren't researchers. The hope is that the chief academic officer has training in research methods, has training in research design, and can help the school district more carefully vet which program has the best caliber or the highest tier of evidence of effectiveness. Because then we're getting the best chance that the money that's being spent is going to give us a program that actually is highly effective.
So with the type of programs that you're talking about, it doesn't matter if it's now or, one of the slew of other programs that are out there.
Right.
And I know this is a how long is a piece of string question, but I mean, every parent asks it. And I'm sure you asked it yourself at one point. I know we did. Um, how do you know once your child is in the program? How do you know that it's working? One, and how long should it be before you start seeing results? And I know that's a very tricky, slippery slope to answer a question, but I mean that's the question that parents want to know.
Yeah. And that's a really important question that they should be asking, which is there any scientific evidence that this is going to make progress in months versus years? And there's lots of common myth or popular lore about dyslexia and learning disability saying, everyone knows it takes 2 to 7 years to really change, decoding skills, and any program that claims to do it faster than that is just nonsense. But when you actually go to the research and say, yeah, but what does the research show in these peer-reviewed studies? We have studies that show in some interventions, in a matter of 2 months, students went from the 5th percentile to the 45th percentile in decoding skills. So those are large scale, top tier, highest level of evidence, randomized controlled trial studies. And so if your parents be given a program, the school is going to say, we're going to try this for the next year, we'll reevaluate at the end of the IEP, then it doesn't sound like the school has a lot of confidence in that program. It shouldn't take a year before we actually start to see results in a program. Other programs have been reported to show results in a matter of months. That's the programs parents should be looking for. And more importantly, not just because somebody told you it could improve in months, but there's actually peer-reviewed research studies that show this was an 8-week treatment project, or this was we have other studies where it's like with 5-year-olds, and those studies ran for about 2 years. And the kids got a little bit of intervention, 4 days a week, 2 days a week with a reinforcement aid activities, and 2 days a week of instruction, 20 minutes a day. And they did that for 2.5 years, a little over 2 years. Those are longer term type of studies as well. So trying to find, if the group says, hey, we want you to use this new reading program or that reading program. And I'm not really going to name them all because it's not really trying to single out any one study. All reading programs, all dyslexia remediations should be held to the standard of, do they have randomized controlled trials? Because that gives the parents the best chance to find the most effective program. But again, some in our online work that we do with the Now Programs company, and nowprograms.com is, putting kids online, and some are doing 1 session a day, 5 days a week, and it might take 160 sessions. There's some posts about this happening right now in the private Facebook group, Now Programs Advice, Support, and Praise group, where one parent posted, hey, I know that it usually takes about 160 hours. Is that for one program? Is that for all 4 programs from the Now company? And other parents have written in right away and said, hey, no, that's actually for one program. But one of my kids and some parents have had like 2, 3, or 4 kids do the same dyslexia remediation. And they've said, well, one kid did it in 80, the other did it in 120, the other did it in 160. And so there's all kinds of different ranges of duration. Our approach in the Now Company and more centers is to try to give a conservative estimate and say, look, average is 160, plus or minus 20. But in some situations, we've had students finish the program in, close to 80 hours. That would be like your son's experience as a 15-year-old. And he wasn't doing one session a day. He's doing 2 or sometimes even 3 sessions a day, because that high intensity increases the rate of progress. It's not as flat. It's not as slow a progress. It's a faster rate of progress because you're doing more practice per day, 5 days per week.
So in this 160 hours roughly that we're talking about, what type of improvements should parents start to see, say, within the first 40 hours? And again, so I say this, but I want everybody to understand that this is based off level and severity of the disability. So that, when I say how long is a piece of string, this is what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
Depending on how severe your dyslexia is, whether you have ADHD, whether it's managed or not, or you have, other co-occurring disabilities that go along with it, obviously that causes the length of time or the amount of progress to either speed up or slow down.
Yeah.
That's understandable. As a parent, we understand that. But say the first 40 hours, what should we see?
Well, speaking just from our program and that Now Foundations program, we know in about 40 hours, you're going to have made it through the phoneme awareness training portion of the program. You'll have already started into the phonological awareness training portion, which basically means you've worked on some single sound discrimination activities that are part acoustic, part visual, part oral, tactile, kinesthetic, that follows a developmental model of how we think the brain typically builds phonological awareness. And then you're getting into the syllable structures of 2 sound words and 3 sound words, as well as judging those kind of 5 changes that can happen that are characteristic of a dyslexia or a deficient reading skills, which is, can you judge adding sounds, omitting sounds, substituting sounds, repeating sounds, or reversing 2 sounds? And then you're working through the application of those skills to the action of actually taking 2 sounds and blending them together. That's actually the definition of reading. Reading is blending sounds together, just from the actual decoding side of it, which is the sounding out words aspect of it. The opposite is you're hearing a 2 sound or 3 sound word, and you're having to take that word and split it apart into 3 sounds. That's actually similar to what the brain does when it spells. You hear somebody say a word, the word comes into the ear, it's like a chunk of sounds, and then inside your language cortex over here on the left side, your brain starts to split it apart and figure out, okay, yeah, it's k, that's and that's combining the letters that go with those sounds, and now you're engaging the act of spelling. So in about 40 hours, our experience of what we're doing, it's going to take you into those preliminary phoneme awareness and that neurology of all the aspects of speech sounds, into the phonological awareness activity of 2 to 3 sound words. And as soon as you master 3 sound words, then that Now Foundations program is beginning to work towards the letter sound associations. You're bringing in letters and you're really working with written words for reading or written words for spelling. But other programs, they're going to tell you at 40 hours, you'll see no progress yet. They're still just learning the rules. If it's a more phonics-based approach, it's really working on phonetic rules of, what's the C going to say? What's the AI going to say? What is a PH saying? Maybe they're doing word family work, or you're learning syllable types. They're going to spend about 40 hours just learning syllable types and how to, demarcate syllable types. So I think it's really important for families to ask for, what should I see happening when, and watch for those signs of progress. If those signs of progress, one, one, can't be articulated by the school or by the instructor or by the tutoring center or whatever it is, then that's highly suspect that you're really not in a program that has a high degree of effectiveness. Because if the program is highly effective, the people who are providing it should be able to tell you, is there a strong likelihood or low likelihood that you're going to be able to really consistently see progress through the steps of the program.
So Nadine made a comment here saying something to keep in mind is that those of us with older kids, they may not test, quote unquote, test better with a district because the type of tests that the districts use, it more focuses, especially when you're talking about older kids, it's more focusing on comprehension, retention of that information that you're reading. However, one of the things that I try to explain to parents a lot is about the more you do, the better you get. So that's where this whole, we've heard that our entire life, the more you practice, the better you get, the faster you're going to get. Well, that's where this really comes in play. Once you have the skills and you've made those new connections, the more that you read, the better, faster you get, the more fluency you're going to see, the better your comprehension is going to get. So that is when you start seeing the testing at the school level start to progress. That's not to say that you won't see it earlier. However, with the older kids, like my kids, and even for me, what tends to happen is you have a fight or flight response because we've been so used to not being able to do something. And I try to get people to understand it's very painful to have to go through that and face that every time that you try to read something. It doesn't matter if you're 45 like I was, or you're 15 or you're 5. That's that feeling of shame is the same no matter where you're at or how old you are. So that fight or flight response really comes back in and comes in quick. So that's the reason why I tell people you got to lean into your newfound skills and know that you can do it.
Well, I think that the comment is a really important comment, because if the school's measures don't match the instructional method, then you're not actually measuring what the program's actually trying to change. And so it's really important too, from that IEP process with parents, if you are in a situation where some parents are fortunate enough that the Now Foundations program is paid for by the school, and then the school wants to see evidence of progress. Well, we have to first be sure that what's been clearly communicated is what should progress look like. And with a program that's really designed developmentally, and you're building from the foundational skills up, which is why we call that Now Foundations, you're changing decoding skills first, and you're not changing speed of reading. Because if you can't read accurately, there's no reason and there's no functional purpose to focus on the speed. Otherwise, you're going to read really fast with a whole bunch of mistakes, and then you've thwarted the real functional goal of reading, which is understanding and comprehension. And likewise, if the school's measure is just a comprehension measure, and the student is still really working on decoding skills, yes, over time, there should start to be some change in comprehension as your accuracy of reading improves. But for some students, even when you change the accuracy of reading, their comprehension skills actually don't improve, because they have a second deficit in a language disorder that really affects listening comprehension or reading comprehension. And for some kids, the language disorder actually affects verbal expression. They really struggle to put words together in an organized, clear fashion to really explain to somebody else either their thinking or their reasoning, or even just telling a story can be problematic. So I think that comment by the Facebook user is really important, which is, the school, if you're looking for the school to measure the progress with a program you fought to get there, make sure that the measures of progress match what the program's actually trying to change at the time it's trying to change.
So that brings up a whole another issue when we start talking about what is being tested, because we as parents, when it comes to the school district, we as parents have no choice in what tests are used or how they're testing or what their methodology is in scoring any of the tests. We as parents, we just have to take the word of what a school district is using. What's your thoughts on that piece of it?
Yeah, well, and that's the situation where you don't have any say with what's happening. But if you know going in that you've advocated for this program, that's also the time to be advocating for how its progress is going to be measured. And so, ideally, the parent does have some say in what's happening with the IEP team who's agreeing to this intervention. The parents really want to be sure you're also advocating for and how is progress going to be measured. And if you have an advocate, you're working with an advocate to make sure that the advocate's helping you make sure the school is going to choose measures that really are on par with the goals and the treatment stages of outcome that the program should be actually achieving. In our NICHD funded study on 8 to 10-year-olds, we drastically changed reading accuracy in a matter of 2 months. That was from the 5th percentile to the 45th percentile. And it was shocking to everyone, but no one had ever done one-on-one instruction, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. This was the first study to ever do that. So it was shocking to see how much progress could be made. But because these students were 8 to 10 years old, and they just learned out how to, for the first time in their lives, had just become accurate in decoding words, there was no change on standardized testing in their reading speed. But if you just learned how to read and sound out words, and the standardized testing is going to compare you to other, say, 10-year-olds, well, arguably they've been reading for maybe as many as 5 years accurately, more than you have, which means they have 5 years more experience than you do with the activity. If somebody has 5 years of experience more than you do in anything, bike riding, knitting, macrame, chess, odds are they're going to be exponentially faster and more accurate and more efficient than you are, surely just because of that sheer amount of additional experience more so than you've had. So in that study, our point was, it's not going to be reasonable to measure reading rate when the program's really not even beginning to get to that point yet. And in that study, it was 1 and 2 years after treatment had ended, you started to see a much steeper growth in their speed and fluency of reading.
So you touched on a few things there when we start talking about reading accuracy versus reading fluency.
Mm-hmm.
Are we, as from the parent's perspective, are we looking at the chicken and the egg?
I would say no, because developmentally, we know kids learn how to read first, and with practice comes speed. That's true of most any skill we're talking about. Bike riding. Just because 2 people have learned how to ride a bike doesn't mean we can put them in a bike race, even if the kids are the same age. If the other kids have been bike riding for 5 years and they're a 10-year-old, and your 10-year-old just decided to enter bike racing, they're not going to be able to compete with the 10-year-olds who have 5 years of practice already under their belt, and the skills are astronomically stronger. So from a reading perspective, we expect to see strong decoding first, because that then fuels the real intent and purpose of reading, which is comprehension. And so you have reading accuracy first, fueling reading comprehension, and over time, then we should see a stronger gain in reading fluency as those skills become more and more automatic. They take less effort, they take less conscious focus. It's kind of like saying, and we'll tell parents this many, many times, say, think back to when you first learned how to ride a bike, or think back to when you first learned how to drive a car. Initially, driving a car basically took all of your attention, all of your focus skills, especially when mom or dad are sitting next to you, because your anxiety is usually up a little bit as well. But now you can drive a car and it's taking like this much brain power because it's effortless for you. And so now your brain's able to be free to do more, which, like in the reading perspective, you're able to think more about the content, more about the comprehension, more about what might happen next, because you're really not struggling to do the reading part.
So again, we're back to the more you build up those foundational skills, the better you get, the faster you get, the less. I like to explain it to parents this way: when you have those foundational skills working at 100% or as close to 100% as possible, well, now your brain doesn't have to work as hard
Right.
for the comprehension piece, the retention piece, and all of the other skills that go with it. So we got to make sure that we, in any program that we put our children in, that it's not teaching splintered skills,
Right.
that we're not allowing them to move faster than the progress that the child needs to make.
Right.
We're making sure that foundational, again, I keep going back to it, the foundation is completely solid, so the rest of the skills can build on top of it.
Exactly.
I mean, the old analogy about the reason why we don't, well, I know in Florida, y'all build houses on the beach, but
with no basements.
yeah, the reason why we don't build a house without a good solid foundation on the beach is because the sand washes it away. Same thing here. If we don't make sure that those foundational skills are solid, then any of the other things that we're trying to build that we're talking about in our 504 meetings or IEP meetings, ART meetings, that we're teaching comprehension or we're teaching executive function skills or any of these other things. I hate to say it this way, but none of those can be effectively remediated without the foundation built.
Yeah, exactly. The brain has a developmental hierarchy. A more basic way to explain that is everyone speaks a language first before they read it. Reading comes later. And because it's far more complicated than reading, typically spelling begins to develop much later than reading, because it's about 100 times harder than reading is in terms of all the visual memory parts of it. Plus now there's fine motor skills, plus then there's visual plus motor skills to make sure you're getting all the letter formations proper in the right direction. Sentence writing skills come later. Paragraph writing skills are more advanced and should be later. Book report writing skills, which is multiple paragraphs, are later. So there's a developmental hierarchy that we should be thinking of. And if a program says, yeah, we're going to do a little bit of the science of reading, we're going to do some vocabulary, we're going to do some fluency, we're going to do some morphology, we're going to do some comprehension, we're going to do some phonological awareness. That's just kind of haphazard and random. And that's not how the brain typically builds skills. So we're a lot less likely to see consistent growth and progress when there's not really a developmental hierarchy of how these skills are being built, one level on top of the other, because the brain typically does work in that way of building these skills from the foundation up.
I mean, I guess the hardest thing that parents deal with is there's so much information out on the interwebs, including all of the information that you get from friends and family. It's really hard to sleuth through what is right, what's wrong. How do you make sure that what you're doing for your child is going to work? You're not wasting time. You're not, most importantly, you're not adding to your child's um, frustration and struggle by continuing to go one program after another. I mean, we see that a lot in the school districts, where the school district will come in and you'll do 2 to 3 years whatever in a program, and then all of a sudden they say, well, we've retested, or we've done this and done that, and I think we really need to put them back into another program. Well, look, we only have 13 years to get our kids from starting school to get out and
Yeah.
get to college. And we've got to make sure that these kids are prepared for college. And that's our job as parents, is to make sure that these kids are ready to go when they graduate, regardless if they're going to go to trade school, or they're going to go to university, or they're going to go to the community college down the street. It doesn't matter. The thing that does matter, though, is making sure that we are leaving all the options for our future on the table, and without making sure that our kids can read, write, properly spell, they can do math, we are eliminating options for their future employment later in life. And that's really what we're all doing here. We're trying to make sure that our children have the best opportunity to be the best version of themselves after they leave our house.
Yeah, and I think you've hit some really key points, Stephen, which is because right now there's also a really big push for assistive technology. Oh, don't worry about if you can't, read well. There's speech to text. There's screen readers. Don't worry if you can spell. Yeah, there's speech to text. Or don't worry if they can read. There's screen readers. Or there's a pen. Or there's this. But all of those assistive technologies have limitations. Try using them when you're driving down the street and have to read a billboard. Pretty much none of them work when you're driving down the street and have to read a billboard. Or navigation signs on interstates or highways, or street signs. So those,
I like to say when I show up to the doctor's office, or I show up to an interview and I got to fill out an application, or anywhere where I've got to go fill out paperwork. Well, guess what? Guess who showed up with me?
yeah,
My disability.
yeah,
That's the reason why I'm not afraid to call it a disability, because it affects certain areas of my life.
yeah,
Having to fill out paperwork, going to the doctor, having to read, information. I mean, for our parents out there, think about how many times you go buy a house, or you go buy a car. They put stacks of paper down in front of you and go, "Hey, go ahead and read that real quick and sign your name."
oh, about 50 times.
Right. And then, in I can't tell you how many arts I've sat in where, the art committee saying that 85 or 80% of accuracy is good enough. All they have to do is read, whatever the amount of words is, 80% of the time accurately. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
If I slid a piece of paper that was a legal binding contract across the table to you and had 20% of the words blacked out,
mhm.
there's no way in the world you'd sign it.
We would hope not. Yeah,
Well, I mean, there probably are some people that would sign it. They just trust that the company or whoever they're getting the contract from is going to do them right.
right,
However, we have to make sure that we can read that information,
right.
and we can, again, read it, take it in, comprehend what it is, and then make the appropriate decisions about whatever that contract is.
100%. Absolutely. So I think that's why it's important to think about. It's fine to focus on assistive technology in some realms, but it always leaves you limited. It always leaves you without full functional abilities. And if this was a situation where we had no idea how to change it, like, so for example, blindness, we don't have any proven medical treatments right now to reverse blindness. And so then we have no choice but to try to build in accommodations and supports and workarounds, all kinds of different things to help support as much independence and full functionality as possible. But blindness is not the same as dyslexia. Blindness is not the same as dyscalculia or dysgraphia, or even a large number of the diagnosed neurodevelopmental disorders, even language disorder, articulation. Many of those disorders are very much responsive to evidence-based, highly proven, with a high caliber, or what DOE calls a high tier of evidence, that this program is going to help change the individual's functional skills. So dyslexia is not the same as blindness. We shouldn't just focus only on accommodations. And other groups are trying to focus on the perspective that let's just focus on your strengths and not talk about your weaknesses. I'm tired of hearing people talk about my weaknesses. Yes, I can't read. Let's just accept it. I can't read. Now let's talk about how creative I am. Or let's talk about my imagery skills. But the problem is there is no large scale, high caliber study that shows that every person with dyslexia has one, two, or even five skills that some people like to promote and say there's five, strengths every dyslexic person has. That's wishful thinking, and it's not scientifically accurate. And so rather than hoping everyone with dyslexia had already built these other skills, why not figure out how to use evidence-based, high caliber interventions and change weaker skills into strengths? Because that gives our students, gives our children, gives our adults, the best chance for the most functional life possible. That gives them the full control of what to read, when they read it, where they read it, how they read it, and when they want to read it, because they have the skill to be able to do it.
So again, we're talking about options, right? I
Yes.
still use assistive technology. I still use audio books, and sometimes I'll use spell check, because you know what, my fingers will get going, and there's sometimes I misspell words, but it's an attention issue. Um, it's not a I can't spell the word issue. And um, we can't continue to lean on accommodations. Which, hey, look, I am one that we fought for accommodations with our kids in school, tooth and nail. And I forced the district to abide by the accommodations the way that they're supposed to. Um, However, I wanted to make sure that it was a choice of my kids once they got remediated, that, hey, if you want to use these, great. If you don't, great. But you have the ability now to move forward.
Now, one viewer says that they really want accuracy aims to be, greater than 95%. Agree 100%. 95, 97, 98, 100%. The higher the accuracy, the better, because accuracy fuels comprehension, or, inaccuracy fuels misunderstanding. And so your goal is as best accuracy as possible. And the brain has multiple ways to help fuel accuracy. It's not just decoding that fuels accuracy. Decoding plus comprehension creates a check and balance system. As you're reading along and you misread the word can for can't, like you just, make a attentional error, you kind of just guessed past it really quick. It really wasn't a decoding error. You're just kind of going so quick, you substituted a word, and that changes the meaning. The meaning part of the brain's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense based on what the two or three sentences before said. that's kind of a check and balance that uses part of the comprehension system along with part of the decoding system to make this reader as fully functional as possible. And one thing that we've mentioned before that parents can do today immediately that helps fuel the comprehension system of the brain, it's not tell people, hey, go find the main idea, go find the main actors and the actions. That's comprehension. A lot of cognitive science research shows that comprehension is fueled by mental imagery. It's more of a right hemisphere part of the functional system. And can you visualize and picture the scene and see the characters and fast forward to the movie and rewind in the movie and zoom in on a scene? And the more we build those imagery skills in our children, it also fuels comprehension, reasoning, problem solving, infer, predict, conclude. And guess what? It's a big part of executive functions because it can actually help with planning and sequencing. And if parents today say to kids, let me tell you what I'm picturing, and you describe the movie you have in your head, you're really automatically teaching children, one, the brain can actually make movies. Believe it or not, some people have what's called aphantasia. They have no idea how to make movies in their head. They've never heard of it before. They've never seen it. And they just try to remember what they hear you say. So they're trying to auditorily remember every word you say, and it's impossible to do. The brain just can't do a memorization of every word in a conversation or even a TV show. So if you just start talking to your kids today about what you visualize, what you see, what you picture, yeah, I could picture this, I could picture that, you're actually already beginning to actually help your children be more aware of how the brain typically works. And that every human brain, not just dyslexics, every human brain has the potential to be really strong in imagery skills. But just like bike riding, if no one teaches you how to do it and you don't actually get practice or even more advanced expert level training, it's not going to get that strong for you unless you just happen to be lucky and it kind of just automatically started happening. The more explicit the instruction is on imagery, the faster parents can build that skill as well.
So is this why some people can watch a movie and tell you exactly what's going to happen without ever seeing the movie because they can already play it out?
Yeah, they can retrieve the whole movie, rewind it in their head. Kind of like I say to parents sometimes, let's pretend you just saw an episode of Friends when it was like a new TV show. And people like, do you like Friends, that movie, that TV show? Like, yeah, I love that show. It's funny. It's hilarious. Ross, Rachel, da-da-da. I said, well, can you tell me every word, every actor and actress said in the first 5 minutes of that episode of Friends? They'd be like, no, I can't remember everything they said. So, well, can you tell me what happened in the first 5 minutes? And like, yeah, I can tell you. Like, well, but wait, how? How can you tell me what happened when you forgot all the words you heard while you're watching the show? And then parents realize, because actually I can retrieve that episode. I can kind of see it in my mind's eye. I can remember, hey, this happened at the beginning. Ross came in and did this, and Rachel did this. And from that image, you take the imagery of the right hemisphere and convert it back into words, which is more linguistic of the left hemisphere, and you explain it to somebody else. And if you explain it in enough detail, their brain actually is listening to making a movie that matches the movie you have that you actually physically saw with your eyes.
All right.
So a powerful take-home message of something to put in place right away. The sooner parents prime, model imagery, the faster you can help your kids begin to build comprehension. There's programs for this. There's lots of different training programs on imagery. And by imagery, we're not talking about mnemonics. But unfortunately, unlike what we have in dyslexia, where the talk today was really like about the levels of evidence, you've got randomized controlled trials. That's the gold standard. You've got just small scale empirical studies. Those results just apply to that study and the kids that are in that study. But because it's not a randomized controlled trial, we don't know if you'll get the same results with another group of kids like that group. And if you have a study that's just kind of like a sample of convenience, like somebody gave a classroom a reading program, and they said, hey, we gave this to this classroom, and the kids did it, and they all got better. Well, pretty much any program you give kids that you practice is going to have some positive effects in some way. So that they just gave it to a classroom, again, one, it's not a scientifically designed study, and it doesn't mean it's really that effective of a program. And it certainly doesn't mean that program is more effective than another program. And then even lowest caliber science is, hey, I've heard about that this school district uses this program, so it must work because they bought it. And that's just kind of like hearsay, what we call anecdotal information. Or I say, yeah, I know the marketer of a program, like a phonics program, from a publisher says, we've got this program in 110 schools. Well, that might just mean you're really good at sales. It doesn't mean the program's really working. Because the question is, well, did they keep it? How long did they keep it? How many schools actually have exited your program now and gone on to something else? Because those are all important pieces of the level of evidence. We don't have that caliber of science for changing comprehension. I personally, and maybe somebody else does, I personally don't know of any randomized controlled trials comparing mental imagery training A with mental imagery training B with mental imagery program C to figure out which program actually boosts comprehension the most. But certainly it's possible to do those studies. And if we did do those studies, we have a much better chance of having much more information about how to train movie making skills so that the most students make the largest progress in the shortest amount of time.
So we're coming up here on the top of the hour. So let's recap just a little bit. So for parents, we got to make sure that we're asking questions about where is the research behind whatever program that either you're paying for privately or the school district is using. You want to make sure that progress. And again, when I'm saying progress, I'm not talking about, well, my kid couldn't read cat yesterday and now 3 months later he can read cat or she can read cat. That's not progress. I like to ask the question of what are we measuring progress against? So parents, we got to make sure that we're asking those questions about what does progress look like? And don't talk to me about everybody else's kid that's in the room and how they're doing the same as everybody else. No, I want to know about my kid and my kid's deficits and or how they're progressing. We're moving that deficit closer to their strengths. Really, that's what we have to make sure that we're asking for when we're having these discussions again with the school district and or with a private interventionalists. So there's that piece, and then again, go read the research. If there is no research, I mean zero, that may be your answer.
And people commonly ask me, hey, we hear you don't like OG programs. I'm like, this is not a personal preference for me. It's not about what I like. It's about go read the research on OG programs or any other dyslexia program that's out there. David Kilpatrick has reviewed the research. Dr. Elena Grigorenko has reviewed the research on phonics-based programs. Louisa Moat talks about the research about the programs. Sally Shaywitz does as well. There's many other people who've already actually helped condense it and reduce it for you. And you may be surprised that commonly what you're hearing and you see on the internet doesn't actually match what the researchers are saying. So it's better to not take personal opinion. It's better to actually go find the research or find somebody that you trust who really has good information, good knowledge, and professional training that can help condense it for you in a way that meets your ability to understand it. It's because then you're making the most educated decision possible for you and your child or for yourself as you're an adult with dyslexia, and you have the best chance of getting the best outcomes. That's really the take-home message today is know the science, know the caliber of science, and the higher the caliber of science, the better the chances are for large gains, not just for your child, but for any child who gets that program or any person with dyslexia who gets a evidence-based from randomized controlled trials dyslexia program. And I want to end my last comment with saying, Stephen, that's the only caliber of science that Sally Shaywitz and the Yale Center for Dyslexia advocates for dyslexia interventions. They need to be evidence-based from randomized controlled trials. That's the same caliber of science that is what helps govern or guide pediatricians in choosing medications. It's highly reliable, highly safe, and gives parents the best chance to make the best choices.
Awesome. Well, we'll meet back here next week. So, Dr. Conway, I appreciate it. Thank you again for coming in here and answering some questions for our folks out here watching. So be ready with questions and everything else next week.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for your time. Everyone have a great weekend. And yes, these will be stored on YouTube by Monday. They're actually already available to watch as soon as we end on these individual Facebook groups as well. Take
Awesome.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.